Amen. Our first reading today is from John chapter 20, verses 19 to 31. John tells us about when it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews. Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his Lord. He said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails, and my hand in his side, I will not reach out your hand and put it in my own to believe." Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to from not seeing him, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and rejoice with an indescribable and glorious joy, for you are receiving the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. May God bless you for understanding these readings from. Pastor Rick Lemberg describes himself as a Presbyterian by earthquake. And he told this story. His grandmother, who was a Baptist, moved her family from Iowa to California. And after she arrived in California, a Presbyterian pastor came to see her and invited her to come to that Presbyterian church. Here was the grandmother's response: "I'm a Baptist, and it will take an act." And then while they were chatting, an earthquake shook the house. Now, this grandmother had never experienced anything like that. She really didn't even know what happened. But when the earthquake settled in, she turned to the Presbyterian pastor and said, "See you at the Presbyterian church." Have you ever wished that faith was that easy? That God would give you some unmistakable sign about your faith? Hopefully one a little less daunting than the earthquake. But faith is usually not that easy. And I really don't think God intended for faith to be all that easy. Rather, we might say faith is part of the struggles that we go through too, and this is the language that we don't often use anymore as much, but to fit our souls for Him. That comes through these struggles that we face, and maybe God sends our way. Help develop our faith. What a week it had been for Jesus' disciples, the week leading up to Easter. So many things have happened and happened so fast. On Palm Sunday, Jesus riding into Jerusalem in the crowds. Then a few days later, he was arrested. His disciples really didn't know what to do next. So, at our reading today, they were basically hiding out, lying low, fearing for their own life, unsure of what was going to come next. And then early on Easter morning, and the details vary a little bit depending on which of the four Gospels you read, but one of the women who went to Jesus' tomb found that it was empty. The stone had been rolled away, so she could look in and actually see that, and then somebody was there to tell her that he had risen from the dead. Peter and another disciple ran to the tomb, and they also saw that the tomb was empty. And John, in his gospel, tells us that Mary Magdalene actually talked to the resurrected Christ that day. That evening, as we read, Jesus' disciples were behind, listening to the risen Christ with their own eyes. Jesus said to them, "As the Father has sent me, so I send you." So these disciples, the root of that word really means pupil or learner, are now becoming apostles, which means those. But that first time when Jesus appeared to them in our reading today, Thomas was not there. And when the other disciples told him that they had seen the resurrected Christ, he doubted. He didn't believe it. We may have had some doubts too. I really think I was reminded of a story about former Major League Baseball player Dave Trebek. Cancer. And you can imagine it was a difficult time for him and his family. I mean, not only had he lost his arm, he had lost his baseball playing career. He was doing that and he began receiving letters from other people. Many of these letters were ones to encourage him. But then people also began to write him about their situation, said in part about what happened to me. I guess that we all know probably at least a person or two who's gone through some devastating event in their life. Even shared his faith with others in the hopes that they would be helped as they develop. Whenever we knock on heaven's door, we state by our very presence at the door that we believe God. I think it would be very safe to say that people have always had doubts. And if you go back to those earliest disciples of Jesus, we sometimes maybe idealize. They certainly never had any. Well, I think they did. I think they struggled with their faith too. Jesus' closest disciples or apostles really didn't believe in the resurrected Jesus until they had seen him. And then we found out the same thing was true about Thomas. But I believe we could find many examples about how doubting and questioning, many examples of how that has led for people to come to faith or else to realize a deeper faith. Linda Faree wrote this: as a new believer, I pretended a confidence I often didn't feel because I thought asking questions or admitting doubts indicated unbelief. Later, she said, I came to realize that by searching the scriptures and talking honestly with other Christians, we could together seek answers, grow in faith as a result. I say to you this morning, our doubt and faith can lead to a deeper faith. And I wonder what was going through Thomas' mind in that week between when Jesus made his first appearance to the disciples and Thomas wasn't there, and then the second time when he was. And notice something that I think is important to note, that those other disciples didn't exclude Thomas. The second time he was with them. And I think in the church, when we have people who come to us and are searching, we don't want to exclude them. We want to accept them and support them, because through their searching, they too may come to a deeper faith. When Jesus came back the second time, Thomas was there. Jesus offered for him to touch his wounds, but Thomas didn't do that, and he turned to Jesus and said to him, my Lord and my God. As much as our readings today might speak to our lives and others' lives, I think there is a difference between our faith and the faith of Thomas and those other disciples. I mean, they got to see the risen Christ in person, and then they believed. But for us, we fit into a category of those who come to faith without having seen Jesus, those first century disciples did. And after Thomas made his profession of faith, here's what Jesus said: blessed are those who have not seen me and yet have come to faith. That's us. We rely on the witness of others to help us come to faith. And then we hope, as we come to faith, our witness will also help them. Here's what John wrote at basically the end of our reading today. These things are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Christ, and that through believing you may have life in his name. Pastor Bruce Larson told about a woman who is in one of the churches. And according to Mrs. Chan, the problem was that her son-in-law was not a Christian. She said if he could just be converted, all would be well. She going to buy her son-in-law an airplane ticket. And one of the pastors thought of her son-in-law. But Mrs. Chance still went ahead with her plan. She bought her son. Her son-in-law came forward and gave his life to Christ as his Savior and Lord. Mrs. Chan said she was not really surprised about what had happened. Our faith, our coming to faith may not have happened that dramatically. And for many people, it does not. But people come to faith because they hear and believe. Doubting the question, we come to faith by hearing